Okay, let's be real for a second. All this talk about tariffs,
Yeah.
it can be kind of a lot, right? It's like this constant worry in the back of your mind, like what's going to happen? What does it all mean for me, for my wallet, for the economy in general?
Absolutely.
And you're trying to stay informed, but it's easy to get lost in all the details.
It really is.
So that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Yeah, we're going to try to break it all down.
We're talking tariffs specifically. Some pretty interesting reports coming out of Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal.
Very interesting.
Suggesting that the Trump administration might be changing their game plan.
Yeah.
Maybe moving away from those big sweeping tariffs we were hearing about before and looking at something a little more targeted, a little more focused.
Right.
So that's what we're really going to dig into today. What does this potential shift mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean for you? Which countries are we even talking about?
Yeah.
What could the impact be on businesses, on the economy as a whole? I mean, this is a big deal, and we want to make sure you understand what's going on.
Absolutely.
So to help us break all this down, we've got Peter Harrell back with us.
Thanks for having me.
Peter's a non-resident fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
That's right.
And he served as Senior Director for International Economics and Competitiveness on the National Security Council during the Biden administration.
I did.
So, Peter, let's jump right in.
Okay.
When you look at these reports, what really stands out to you?
Well, first off, you got to remember, nothing's set in stone yet.
True.
We're still waiting on the official announcement.
Mm-hmm.
Probably going to come around April 2nd.
Okay.
But here's the thing. The messaging we've been hearing from administration officials lately, both publicly and privately, it's definitely shifted.
Oh, really?
It seems like they're leaning towards a more targeted approach to tariffs.
Okay, so not that broad brush we were worried about.
Right. More like a scalpel.
Interesting.
So the impact's still going to be significant, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But it might not be the total economic earthquake some folks were predicting.
Okay, so less widespread chaos.
You could say that.
Now, this term keeps popping up, reciprocal tariffs.
Right.
What exactly does that mean in this context?
Well, basically, it means these tariffs would likely be aimed at a specific group of America's biggest trading partners.
Yeah, okay.
So, not a blanket tariff on every country we do business with. The reports specifically mention places like Vietnam and some major European economies.
Okay, so still some pretty big players.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
These countries make up a huge chunk of U.S. trade.
So even though they're being more selective,
Right.
it could still have a big impact.
Exactly. Targeted doesn't necessarily mean small.
Gotcha. So what about the actual rates of these tariffs?
Yeah.
Any clues on those?
Well, there's some talk that they might be lower than what we were expecting.
Like lower than that 20 to 30% range everyone was bracing for.
Right.
That would be a relief.
If it turns out to be true, it could definitely ease the burden.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Now, there was also this mention of holding off on stacked sectoral tariff. That sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, it's like a double whammy.
What exactly does that mean?
Okay, so imagine you've already got a 25% tariff on imported steel, let's say.
Okay.
Then they slap on another 20% reciprocal tariff.
On top of that.
Just on steel from a specific country.
Wow.
So now you're talking a total of 45%.
Ouch.
That's what stacked tariffs are.
Yeah, no thanks.
And it seems like the administration is signaling they're going to hold off on that for now.
Which is good news, I guess.
Yeah, it means they're at least trying to avoid those really dramatic price hikes.
Especially for businesses that rely on those imported goods.
Right, and for industries where there are already tariffs in place.
Yeah, makes sense. So, Peter, who do you think is driving this shift?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah. Is this a real change of heart within the White House?
Maybe.
Or are certain advisors having more influence right now?
Well, we've definitely heard some key figures talking about this more limited approach.
Like who?
Well, National Economic Council, Director Hassett, Treasury Secretary Besant.
Yeah.
They've both been pretty vocal.
Interesting. And what about Secretary Lutnick over at Commerce?
Yeah, he's interesting.
Because he's been pretty pro-tariff.
He has.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been seen as a bit of a hawk on this issue.
Right.
But even he's been mentioned in these reports.
So maybe he's come around to this more targeted approach?
Maybe. So it seems like there's a coordinated message coming from different parts of the cabinet.
Interesting.
But whether that translates into actual policy?
Right.
Well, that's up to the president, ultimately.
Always is. It's interesting, though, how much influence these advisors seem to have.
Yeah, it shows how policy is never made in a vacuum.
Right. It's all about the push and pull.
Exactly.
Speaking of push and pull, do you think President Trump is reacting to how the markets have been responding to all this tariff talk?
I think that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, because we've seen some pretty negative reactions.
We have. And remember what happened with the tariffs on Canada and Mexico?
Oh, yeah.
He imposed those tariffs. The markets freaked out.
Big time.
And eventually he backed down.
So there's precedent for the market influencing these decisions.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I'd say it's probably a mix of things.
Like what?
Well, you've got the market reactions, but you've also got all the economic analysis and recommendations coming from within the administration.
Right. So both internal and external pressures.
Exactly. It's a dance.
It really is. Zooming out for a second, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, globalization.
Right.
It's really shaped the global economy as we know it.
Absolutely.
So how deeply is this interconnectedness baked into U.S. companies and the U.S. GDP?
Oh, it's deeply ingrained. It's part of the fabric of how many U.S. companies operate and how the U.S. economy functions.
So even targeted tariffs could disrupt that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Because, well, the America First agenda might be pushing for a change. The reality is globalization is here to stay.
Right.
It's not going anywhere.
And sometimes these tariffs, they can actually backfire.
Oh, they can. They can totally undermine the goal of strengthening American manufacturing.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you slap tariffs on imported components.
Like car parts.
Exactly. You're making it more expensive for U.S. car manufacturers to do business.
Oh, I see.
Bloomberg actually reported on some cases where tariffs on imported steel have already driven up costs for American manufacturers.
Making them less competitive.
Exactly.
So it's not just about the finished products.
Nope. It's about the whole supply chain.
It's all connected.
It is. And this isn't just limited to traditional industries either.
Oh, really?
Think about high tech.
Okay.
Like the equipment they need to make semiconductor chips.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff comes from Europe and Japan. And we're talking some seriously expensive machinery.
Like how expensive?
Like upwards of $100 million per machine. And the Wall Street Journal reported that even a 10% tariff on that equipment could add a huge cost to building or expanding chip factories here in the U.S.
Which would slow down innovation.
Potentially, yeah.
So these aren't just theoretical impacts.
No, they have real-world consequences.
For investment, for jobs, for the entire tech sector.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about the bottom line.
Okay.
What could these tariffs, even the targeted ones, mean for the earnings of U.S. corporations?
Well, this is where investors really start to sweat.
I bet.
Because most big U.S. companies, they've been operating in a pretty low tariff world for a long time. And that's built into their earnings projections. Now, before all this talk about targeted tariffs, there was some analysis that suggested those broad 20 to 25% reciprocal tariffs could have knocked down S&P 500 earnings by an average of 16%.
16%, that's huge.
Yeah, it's a big risk.
So even though these targeted tariffs might have lower rates, companies could still take a hit.
Yeah, especially those with global supply chains.
Right.
Or those that rely heavily on imports from the targeted countries.
Makes sense. So it really depends on who and what gets targeted.
It does.
Okay, so just to recap, it sounds like we're looking at a potential shift, maybe a more focused approach to tariffs from the Trump administration.
Could be.
Targeting specific countries maybe with lower rates.
Possibly.
And probably hitting pause on those stacked tariffs.
It seems like it.
But of course, we're still waiting for an official announcement.
Right around April 2nd.
Okay, so Peter, big question.
Yeah.
Is this a genuine change of heart?
It might be.
Or are they just reacting to all the market jitters?
That's what we need to figure out.
Yeah, and even if these targeted tariffs do go into effect, what's the real impact going to be on businesses, on supply chains, on the economy as a whole?
Lots of questions still to be answered.
Lots of unknowns. It's a fascinating story, though, and it's still unfolding.
It is.
Peter, thanks so much for walking us through all this.
Glad to be here.
And for you, the listener, as you think about all this, I want you to really consider the bigger picture, how interconnected our world is.
It's true.
How any change in trade policy can create ripples everywhere.
Ripples and waves.
Exactly. And think beyond the immediate market reactions.
Okay.
What other forces are at play here? Geopolitics, domestic politics.
Right.
Even technology.
It all ties in.
How might all that shape these trade decisions?
Yeah.
How might it impact your understanding of the economic landscape?
Good question.
In the months and years ahead?
It's something to think about.
It is. It's a complex issue with a lot of moving parts.
Definitely.
But hopefully this deep dive has given you a better grasp on where things stand.
That's the goal.
And maybe even spark some of your own questions.
That's what we want.
Keep those questions coming.
Keep learning.